But every time a crisis arose in Europe, particularly in the Middle Ages, the first impulse was blame the Jews.
Yeah.
And so, for example, second only to the actual mortality of people who died of the Black Death were the countless thousands and tens of thousands of Jews who were massacred in Europe, who were blamed for it, and who were it was claimed that they were poisoning wells and that they were doing this and that. They were responsible for this terrible disaster. And so what we now call anti-Semitism has a long and very unproud history in Europe. So then, fast forward to the beginning of the 20th century, and lo and behold, this document, which we know now with certainty was completely fraudulent, called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, surfaced, which purported to be sort of the leaked secrets of this, ultra, secret Jewish conspiracy called the Elders of Zion, who wanted to control the world. And of course, that influenced many people. Adolf Hitler, of course, among them, but also
Henry Ford
and many otherwise prominent, rational, sober people believed in that. So this is the reason that today it's because that, of course, had such devastating consequences for modern history. That one, false document and led to the Holocaust and all the rest of that. It's very easy for the enemies of freedom today to look at people like us and say, well, you must be anti-Semitic because you're talking about a global conspiracy.
Yeah.
And isn't that the same idiotic hysteria that led to the whole Protocols of the Elders of Zion and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem. And even to this day, there are people who still believe the protocols are real. There certainly are such people in niche areas. We have nothing to do with them. We never have. We disclaim that. But the fact that the protocols was a hoax and the fact that the Jewish conspiracy is not real does not discredit
that there's
this idea that there is in fact a conspiracy. And some of the conspirators doubtless are Jewish, some of them are Catholic, some of them are Lutherans, some of them are atheists, probably a majority of them are atheists. We don't really know, perhaps. That's largely irrelevant. So this is the problem, is that there are so many of these sort of red herrings and false flags and distractions that have been introduced that allow people who haven't studied the history carefully to simply broad brush anyone who makes a claim of any type of conspiratorial organization as being fraudulent, as being racist, as being anti-Semitic, and so forth.
Do you think any of that is deliberate, Dennis?
Well, I think what we have here is a great tool for someone who wants to fasten tyranny on a society to use toward that end. So if you can generate a great deal of hatred toward an arbitrary group, let's say the Jews, for instance, or in Russia, some of the economic classes, but generate hatred of the mass population toward that minority group, then you can say, well, my gosh, they're a direct threat to our nation. We have to do something about it. And in order to do something about it, we need to grant the government these extraordinary powers. Well, of course, granting the government and the people who control the government those extraordinary powers is the goal in and of itself. It has nothing to do with these arbitrary groups. It's to find a wedge issue that allows those who would like to grab total control over the power and the levers of government, give them a lever by which they can maneuver that power into their own hands. And that's exactly what this does. And it's extremely dangerous. It's also been proven extremely effective. That's why we've had such a bloody last 100 and some years of genocide.
Yeah, people are really drawn to that collectivist mindset. When you put someone in this group, is it because it's simple? Now you have a clearer picture, as false and and disillusioned as it is. You have a clearer picture of what the problem is. So by saying it's this group's problem, well, do you think there's any parallel to today's?
Well, could I just point something out? I was thinking as Dennis was making those comments that in fact, if you look at history and also based on my personal experience, having lived for 4 years in a communist country, this tendency to blame some shadowy foreign conspiracy is actually primarily a characteristic of the radical left. Okay, so for example, in your homeland, original homeland of Romania, the last speech given by Nicolae Ceausescu before his overthrow, the dictator of Romania, where he's standing in the center of Bucharest, and what does he say?
I don't remember.
All these I don't know how to say it in Romanian, but he says all these disturbances are being carried out by foreign infiltrators. It's foreigners. It's foreign influences doing this. And when I lived in the People's Republic of China, it was the same way. Every time a crisis like COVID came up, it was all the foreigners' fault. Now it's time to go out and hate the foreigners, blame the foreigners. Foreigners are responsible for everything. Yeah. And you find this anywhere you find so-called left, whatever that means, a left-wing tyranny. But the radical left loves to blame foreigners. So in a sense, and Nazism really is, from our perspective, is a leftist movement as well. Only in the case of Nazism was blame the Jews, the foreigners in our midst, these alien non-Christian people.
Well, the Russians did the same thing previously.
And the Russians did the
right?
same thing. Sure, they did. Every communist country does that because that's their primary means of distracting from the inadequacies of their own regime. Don't blame us. Blame the foreigners. Blame foreign agents and all this type of thing.
Yeah.
This type of paranoia, which is always being assigned to so-called right-wing extremism, whatever that actually means, it's kind of a vague term, is actually indigenous to the left.